Think back to when you learned to draw. What was the first thing that you remember drawing? Chances are that it included hills, maybe the sun, a river, but what was the other thing that was always part of that picture? It was a house, and it is so much more than just an asset. It will probably be the largest purchase that you will ever make. And among all of the major financial decisions that you make, when to buy a house is probably going to be ranking at the top of that list. This is Big Decisions on NDTV Profit, and I'm Alex Matthew. Every week, we bring you conversations that help you make your most important financial decisions with confidence. On today's episode, I'm going to wade into a debate that's been raging for longer than I've been alive. At the very least, should you buy a house or should you live on rent? And as always, I'm curious about what you think. So we ran a poll, and here's what we found.
Everyone has their idea of home sweet home, whether it's the freedom of renting or the stability of home ownership. The concept of finding the perfect place to call home varies from person to person. Now, the younger generation might raise their eyebrows and say, buying a house in this economy. The slightly older generation has the whole concept of apna ghar too internalized. So we asked you on our social media platforms, and let's just say the internet is as divided as it was probably 20 years ago. With a 50-50 split in the results, it really brings forward the point that whether you're team renting or team buying, making a decision between the two is now more complex than ever.
Now, at the onset, I'd like to say that there is no right answer. It's not just black and white, there's a lot of grey. And to talk about the entire spectrum, I'm joined by Santosh Joseph, the founder of Germinate Investor Services. Santosh, thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, pleasure, Alex. And you're talking about the drawing. I still draw a home to begin with. It's the easiest thing I can put together on a piece of paper.
I was asking my producer and she said she drew an apple, but then I think she remembers much more than I do. They say that women remember more than men do.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true, but then when it comes to drawing, you always go for the easy shapes, and home is an easy shape. Don't forget, you can always get it right.
I certainly think so. But okay, let's get into this conversation, because it's not an easy conversation to have, which is why I put the caveat, Santosh, at the start, which is that we're not saying there is one right answer here. There cannot be a right answer.
See, you're talking to humans, right? And when you talk to a machine today in the age of ChatGPT and AI, it's very easy to come with a binary outcome.
Yes.
But when you look at humans and what they're brought up with and the decisions that they have to make, home is not an easy answer to say whether it's good or bad.
I like that you said home and not house.
Yes, it is, because it's a house till you buy it. The minute you buy it, it becomes a home, because now there's ownership, there's belonging, and believe me, there's a whole lot of emotion that makes a house into a home. So,
okay, so let's talk about, we will talk about those emotions, but then we have to strip out those emotions as well. And you talk about both. So at the start, let me do the tough thing and strip out the emotion and talk about the physical asset that is a residential property. And we're sticking to residential here. We're not talking about commercial real estate. What are the cases for owning of property?
See, let's just go back in time and see how typically wealth was made in the families. We had traditional assets, and real estate being one of the most dominant traditional asset, because of which I think many of us, a generation of people like you and me, have benefited from our parents having their own home, and some of them, being a little more prudent, had more than one home.
Yeah.
And they were able to fund so many of key lifestyle events by selling off the extra piece of real estate they had.
Yeah.
So it became a kind of forced savings, which was also real estate, which was also a home that they had a belonging to. Now, the interesting part over here is that people did not know there was asset formation when they were buying a home.
They didn't think about it that way.
No, they didn't. All they were looking at was store of value. And at some level, not being impulsive with their money. Remember, they did this even when the availability of loans were not so easy as it is today.
Okay, but a counterpoint to that is that at the time that you're talking about, which is my parents' generation, most certainly, at that time the the financialization of assets was not as significant as it is right now. The availability of avenues to invest was not as significant. So it was either fixed deposit, not even that in many cases, or buying a house, or in fact buying gold, jewelry. So you were limited in your options. Perhaps that also has to factor.
Absolutely. In fact, because of the limited options available, depending on the quantum of money that you had or the leverage that you were able to take, only then asset formation is happening. For example, money came into a bank account. To make an RD or FD was a natural choice.
Yeah.
From there, you chose an occasion in the family or a festivity to go and buy gold.
Yes.
Real estate was an outlier choice even back then.
Was it more affordable?
Even though it was affordable, you had to make a choice. FD was easy, gold was relatively that much more easy to buy a few grams of gold, and jewelry you could wear it. But real estate, you had to go, search, find, and make a decision.
Yeah.
And even if you get a loan, you have to put a down payment. So don't forget that.
Sure. So, okay, so let's talk about the cases first to buy a house, and then the cases against buying a house. And then we'll talk about the emotional aspect of it. And finally, what we'll do is we'll round it off to say that if you are indeed going out to buy a house, and you will likely have to take a loan to do this, what are the thumb rules to follow? So the first aspect, which is when you are making a case to buy a house, what are those right now, without the emotions?
See, I think without the emotional part, it's very important to figure out the age of the person and the family background. Why am I saying this is because otherwise we'll go on and beating around the bush saying that whether we should buy or not buy. Here, the minute you customize the need to the person, the age and the family requirement, you're very clear. You buy a home because you want to house yourself in. Right? And you want stability for your family, right? And you also want to ensure that you'll buy an asset today, then buy it later when it's expensive. And last, which is kind of a lesser known fact, it's a forced saving for people because they're creating an asset first, paying for it during the course of the time.
Why are you saying that though? In your experience, and the reason I'm asking this is that a lot of people are now aware of the fact that they have to save. They're setting aside a portion of their income. Are you saying that not enough people save?
Well, people do save, but I think thanks to so much of information around saving and how much to save, there's a little bit of confusion for people. For example, if someone is earning, let's say, 75,000 to a lakh, they will be doing a 5,000 rupee SIP and thinking, oh, I'm saving.
Right.
But when you take a home loan, 60,000 will go into a home loan. Can you just look at the quantum straight away on the amount of money that you're putting aside makes you a winner. If you are doing the same thing with your SIP, then you didn't have to even talk about these debates. On the other hand, when you look at taking that home loan and buying the house, you are actually front-ending that and you're getting to enjoy the benefit right away.
Right.
Which is, even if you buy a 75 lakh to a 1 crore rupee home, you're paying a small down payment, enjoying the house, straightforward.
Where are these 75 lakh 1 crore homes? You're sitting in Mumbai, Santosh, and I must tell you that there are no such homes available.
Well, minus the top 4-5 cities in India, I think still a 2 or 3 bedroom would be available. And you're right, even in Bangalore today, that 1 crore or 1.25 crore tickets are a passe. They're no longer available. You'll have to go on the outskirts of the city. But then, people don't want to go on the outskirts city because then they're cut away from the buzz of the city.
Yeah.
So you're right.
Okay, so you've made some strong cases, and ownership in terms of usage is what I'm getting, right?
Correct.
You buy a house and you live in it. You're not talking about buying it as an investment, because we've proven that in several cases, and particularly, and we were talking just before we started this conversation about what an individual thinks when you say, hey, do you want to buy a house? The idea is, the first thing you think of is apartment, right? You're not really thinking of a plot of land, and you're not thinking of a house on that plot of land. So we're still talking about apartments. It's not really a good investment. Is that proven?
Absolutely true. See, the urban person who's looking at this kind of an investment, if you do a dipstick and just check anybody, what do you mean by a house, they will say, or what picture comes to their mind is a cozy 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom apartment for the nuclear family.
Yeah.
Right? Now, when you are looking at plot, building, all these may be financially way better and it makes sense more arithmetically, but people have not even thought about it. There's no bandwidth to buy, to build, to take care and to maintain. So therefore, the easy solution for urban living is to buy a good flat where there's good society, good maintenance, and you know, there's enough amenities for you to run around, maybe the club, maybe to take care of the kids and even senior parents living at home. So there are benefits. So therefore, the way to look at it is, if it works for you, then it makes sense.
Sure. And mostly if you're using all of those services yourself and not renting it out. I think a lot of people don't factor the opportunity cost. They say, hey, you know what, I'm spending so much on rent and that is a sunk cost, it's gone, and I'm paying an EMI, but I'm creating an asset, I'm using it, I'm living in it, even if it's 20 plus years, why not buy a house?
So let's look at it both ways. If you're consuming and you're not paying rent but paying the EMI, it works beautiful and we know that, right? If you're not consuming and you thought that, you know, I cannot be a disciplined saver, so maybe a home will force me to be a disciplined saver.
And the rent that you earn on that is paying your EMI. That's the argument.
But you see, the EMI that you pay and the rent that you get is never equal. And I think we all know it. And if it was that easy, then all of us would be owning multiple apartments.
That's true.
Not that easy. So at some level, let's take a blanket number that about 50% of the EMI that you pay will be the rent. Now, don't forget there are taxes even there. And you'll have to take care of the maintenance cost and the running cost, and as well as even the income that you earn as rent will also be taxed.
Correct.
So keep that in mind. Now, the second part is that when you got this home, you're also assuming renting is easy.
It's not.
Right? We all know the urban challenges of if you want a house for rent, it's challenging and therefore you buy a house. Now, if you have a home, finding a tenant is difficult, and also to find someone suitable to your needs who, you know, most people will tell you this, I don't mind a lesser rent if I can find a suitable tenant. Now, do you want to go through that in an investment, that you want lesser yield because you want a better person, right? So as you start, you know, going down that day-to-day activity, the investment case is clear that if it is not for an apartment, if it's a mutual fund, and even if it is the same rate of return that a SIP can give equivalent to a home loan interest that you pay, which is, let's take today's home loan interest rate of 9.5 or 10%.
Right?
That same 10% that you pay will be on a reducing balance on a home loan. But it will be compounding on an SIP.
But then what about the argument for the tax advantages that you get in the old regime, I must point out.
So whether we take the old regime or whether you were doing this only from a tax angle. So there are people who bought an additional home because they thought that
2 lakhs of interest every year.
And even some bit of principal and interest, both they got tax benefit in both the cases. But the question is, does it add up? The whole tax benefit thing. Now, if the tax benefit thing and the rent that you got was good enough and the tenant was good and the appreciation happened, you see, there are so many ifs. There are few people who have made all these ifs well if they bought right. For example, the same apartment you bought 2 years before it was launched. Could be that maybe you'll almost make it even Stevens, or you leak out a profit. But why do you have to go through all this?
So, but you've done the math, right? And you've just assumed 10%, which is, I think, a very, very conservative number, because you're talking about anywhere between 12 and 15%. Just look at the last 5 years, right? You've done incredibly well in any, even if you invested in a Nifty 50 index fund, you've done incredibly well, 14, 15% on average. So therefore, you've done the math. How much does it amount to over a 20-year period?
So let's take let's take approximately like if someone wants to buy a 1 crore rupee home. We know those homes are not there, but
just for the sake of argument.
About 10 to 15% you have to shell down your money, right, to buy that home. And the balance 85 lakhs, even if you take a 20-year loan at 10%, give or take paying a 75 to 80,000 rupees EMI. Now, assuming that this was an investment requirement and you're also getting a rent, if you were able to take a part of that money, which is about, let's say, 40-50,000 rupees, and instead of the EMI, you put into an SIP. In fact, the SIP should be the full 75,000 or 80,000. At 10% over a 20-year, the money could be about 3.5 crores.
Right.
Now, the question is, in that 20-year period, will that 1 crore home be worth even 2.5 crores?
No, and also you're going to increment your savings. So that's even more than what you're assuming.
Yes.
So it's very significant.
And that's one. But the minute you stretch that 10% to say that like you said, an index fund, Nifty at a 10-year period is given little over 14%.
Sure.
I am not even going on multi-cap and mid-cap because those numbers are staggering, right? And if you take even a 14% CAGR over a 20-year period, I mean, you can buy 5 apartments at the end of 20 years and new apartments.
We're talking about a lot of people, in fact, who've decided to bite the bullet. And what, according to you, are the major pitfalls to avoid? And then we'll talk about tips and tricks.
Yeah, so it's good that if you've decided that you're going to buy a house and you're going to live and, get your family to also enjoy the house along with you. There's nothing like having a roof over your head.
Yes,
and especially,
your own.
Absolutely. And there's no worry or instability of having to move out place to place, even though you may want to live a mobile and flexible life. You need one home. Now, a couple of things that most people miss out in this journey of buying a home is that the bank will fund between 80 to 90%.
Sure.
What you don't realize is that there are other costs to begin with. There are legal costs. There is the sub-register cost that when you go to the local municipal corporation, you got to pay a fee to register the property.
Which is a percentage of the ticket price.
Of the overall deal.
And quite substantial.
It is, any state in the country, it is substantial.
Yeah.
And that's the
it's
revenue.
What, close to 2%?
No, in Karnataka, it's about 7%.
What are you saying?
Yes, on the price of the property.
7%. So
Yes.
you'd be paying 7 lakhs out of 1 crore.
Yeah.
Over and above the 1 crore.
Absolutely.
And is it on the higher side, Santosh?
So basically, that's when some people tend to undervalue or overvalue the property. But whatever the property that you've agreed and transferred the money or paid, it is give or take 7%.
Wow. Okay. So definitely, I didn't know that. Clearly, I'm not in the market for a house. But having said that.
Yeah, but don't forget that. Now, okay, you do all these things and at some level you cross the mountain and you've arrived and now you own your home, and when you walk into it, you're walking into empty walls and it's what we call a warm shell.
It's a
right?
shell, yes.
At best, the builder will give you maybe doors and a good coat of paint on the walls. Hopefully. Now, the interesting part is you'll want a nice house. You want to make it cozy. You want to make it livable. You want to call your family and friends over.
Yeah.
Now, that is the bit of a surprise. Most people think that I can finish it at 5%, 10%, in a few lakhs, but it's surprising that thanks to the way things have moved and the quality of products for interiors and decorative
the cost
stuff,
of products, the inflation,
I think
everything.
you'll have to plan a minimum 20 to 25%, if not more. Because you just look at the math. Instead of the regular tile, you want to go in for granite, the cost is double. From granite, you want to go to marble, the cost is 4x, 5x.
And then you want to go to Italian marble, it's even higher.
Yeah, and then nobody wants a regular paint. They want decorative paint versus wallpaper.
Yeah.
And you walk into the kitchen cabinet starts with 5 lakhs or 7 lakhs.
Right.
And then you want your fancy shower cubicle.
Yeah.
All these costs are not factored in when we are buying. Because when we are buying,
you simply focus on the ticket price.
Yes, you're focusing on the ticket price. You've already hit with the 10 to 20% extras and all the other costs. Now you're hit with another 20%. So therefore, if you're planning for 100% of the money for home, budget for 130, 140% so that you're comfortable.
Yeah.
Don't forget, you need appliances and gadgets for the house, which more often than not is forgotten.
Yes.
And today a fridge doesn't come cheap, and without air conditioning you can't move in. So these are things that are practical.
Yeah, they're practical. So therefore, budget for 130 to 140% at the very least. See, the other major aspect that I find a little stark, a little worrying, is that in order to make that 20% down payment, you are eroding a large part of the savings that you've probably taken a few years to put together. And people say, okay, you know what, I'll worry about my retirement or some of my other long-term goals later. I need to buy a house. How dangerous is that?
It is very dangerous because one, that's now sunk and it's gone. Number two, if you at least use from your savings, it's okay. Now just imagine, even for that, you had to arrange it through an emergency or a short-term borrowing. You're further deep in leverage.
Yeah.
Now, for a sound person who's planning this well, that 15-20% should be through savings, ideally.
Yeah.
Second, you have to figure out as early as possible to replenish that in high growth assets, because your home loan is for 20 years.
Yeah.
Similarly, even when you make your investment plan, keep 20 years in mind. You replenish your that 15-20%, plus also ensure that the physical asset is taken care. Now you need to have enough financial assets, at least a couple of times more than the physical asset.
Is it a better idea, therefore, even if you've decided to buy a house, to defer it a little bit if you don't have enough of a corpus that you've saved up, and to set a goal to say, okay, 5 years from now, I will buy a house, but I need to accumulate a certain corpus for that down payment, and I can't touch my retirement fund just now.
In fact, I think that's probably the only way one should go about it.
Okay.
That if you know the place that you're going to buy, set aside the minimum down payment from your free cash flow, which is essentially what we call our extra or miscellaneous or general corpus of the funds. Use that money. Because using any other quantum of money will actually cash trap you in the short term.
How much of a loan should you take in terms of the EMI? In terms of, okay, of course, there are various factors here, and it's, again, it depends on the context. But as a percentage of, say, a double income family, how much should the EMI be to the maximum?
So, if as a banker, the person looking at your home loan, if your total EMI that you pay is going to be under 50-60% of your gross income, they'll be happy.
Sure.
But in some cases, because they also know real estate appreciates, they go to 70-80% of it.
Because the underlying covers.
Yes, the underlying cover. It's a collateralized asset. But if you can keep it below 50%, then you're taking care of two things. Your running and maintenance costs as a home and a family, and also you'll be left with some money from the gross income X of EMI to also save.
And also, so the other factor, of course, is that in 3 years, hopefully your income has gone up by at least 10% per year, and you are able to then increment that saving even more.
Ideally, the incremental income that you start getting post your home loan is started should help you increase your monthly savings.
Sure.
For some people where there's a disproportionate gain because as age and experience they start getting better salaries and get recognized in their careers, you can actually even figure out how to pre-close the loan earlier.
I was going to ask you, should you always aim to pre-close your loan?
Considering that you have a ticking time bomb of an interest that you're paying, there is a sweet spot of value of money versus the interest component and the leverage. A value of money versus leverage and interest component. If you can wind up in between 8 to 12 years, you're good. And if not, don't beat yourself. Even 15 years is fine. There are many I know that they don't disturb a 20-year home loan, but every incremental money is parallelly building financial assets.
Okay, so again, we've talked about several aspects that you should bear in mind if you are buying a house. Santosh Joseph, I'm asking you now, if you were to be forced at gunpoint. Now I'm making it a little dangerous for you. Yeah, if you were to be forced at gunpoint to say, should I buy a house or live on rent? What would you say?
Well, the answer is purely for your benefit.
It's gunpoint.
No. I know, purely for the benefit, purely for the benefit of the person listening to us. If they are okay, that they do not have an emotional attachment to a home, if they invest their money, at the end of 20 years, they can buy a way better home.
Okay.
Maybe a bigger plot of land or a bigger apartment or maybe a villa, and not worry about EMI and stress. But remember, the caveat comes with you have to be disciplined to put that equal amount of money to let it be in growth assets that can give you a multiplier effect.
Absolutely, and use the velocity that compounding can give you over a period of time. So, Santosh, I've put you at gunpoint at the end of this conversation.
Well, I think you did the right thing because somebody needs to say it as it means, because there's so much of WhatsApp University messages forwarding saying don't rent, buy, don't buy, rent. But people need to know that it will work if you want to make it work. And the clear answer as far as the end result is that instead of having an emotional attachment of just a home, an investment will give you far superior returns.
Absolutely. On that note, Santosh, thanks so much for joining in.
My pleasure, Alex. Thank you.
And to you, dear viewer, let us know what you think. Viewer or listener, I should point out, because you might just be listening to this. Let us know what you think on any one of our social media platforms, and do stay tuned. Lots more content on NDTV Profit.